It was 2008, in the quiet town of General Güemes, Argentina, when something truly bizarre and disturbing was caught on film, something that has haunted locals ever since. The footage was taken by a man named Jose Alvarez, who, along with his friends, had been lingering in the neighborhood after midnight. It was around 1 a.m. when the unsettling incident occurred. They weren't doing anything special, just hanging around, chatting about a recent fishing trip, laughter echoing softly into the stillness of the early morning. Jose casually began filming on his mobile phone. He wasn't trying to capture anything strange. It was just a moment among friends, joking, laughing, the kind of thing you record for no particular reason. The town was dark and hushed, cloaked in the kind of silence only small towns know after midnight. But then, the mood shifted, suddenly and inexplicably. A strange sound broke through their laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like the deliberate clatter of stones being tossed nearby. Their laughter cut off almost instantly, replaced by nervous glances. It was the kind of noise that doesn't fit with the calm of the night. Something about it felt wrong. They turned instinctively toward the source. That's when they saw it. Movement in the tall grass just a few yards away. At first, they dismissed it. Probably a dog, they figured, or some animal rooting around. But the grass wasn't rustling the way it should have. It wasn't natural. It was jerky, as though something small and quick was darting through it, just out of sight. Then it emerged. A small figure stepped hesitantly out from the shadows, just beyond the reach of the dim streetlights. And it was like the air dropped 10 degrees. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Jose's hand trembled slightly as he kept filming, instinct overriding fear. The thing that stepped into the open was not a dog. It wasn't any kind of animal they had ever seen. It was humanoid, but not human. No taller than a toddler, but dressed, actually dressed, in a pointed hat and some kind of cloak or tunic. The figure's movements were twitchy, sharp, and disjointed, unnatural, as if each step required recalibration, like a puppet tugged by unseen strings. Its face was partially shadowed, but its features, those that could be seen, were distorted, unsettling. The nose was large and angular, the jaw sharp, and its eyes didn't shine with reflected light. They just stared, black, motionless, unblinking. Jose and his friends were frozen in place. One of them whispered something, a shaky curse, barely audible. The figure didn't acknowledge them. Instead, it slowly turned its head, not its body, just the head, like it was being swiveled on a rusted hinge, and began to shuffle sideways, crab-like, never breaking eye contact with the group. That's when the panic kicked in. They ran. No one had to say anything. They just bolted. The quiet of the street exploded into the thunder of footsteps and frantic shouting, the once lazy air now crackling with terror. Later, when Jose reviewed the footage, it confirmed what they'd seen. The figure was there, real, moving, watching. The video itself was shaky, dark, and grainy, but you could still make it out clearly enough. And what you saw wasn't something easily explained. After the clip surfaced, others came forward. More people in General Güemes had seen it, or something like it. Some described the same figure. Others spoke of brief glimpses, something small darting into shadows, or strange footprints left in patches of disturbed grass. A quiet dread settled over the town. What started as a bizarre midnight encounter had become something larger, something that couldn't be ignored. People stopped walking alone at night. Parents kept their children indoors after sundown. Whispered stories spread of sightings near schools, alleys, even churchyards. No one ever got close again. No one wanted to. And though skeptics still try to explain it away, Jose's video remains, a silent, jittery fragment of the night that changed the town. Ever since that first sighting, a cold fear lingers in General Güemes, clinging to the streets like mist. Because once you see something that shouldn't exist, you're never quite the same. And neither is the place where it happened. The night of February 9th, 1855 has long haunted the people of Devon. After a light snowfall, the countryside awoke to find something profoundly wrong. A trail of hoof-like impressions, each measuring between 1.5 to 2.5 inches wide, stretched endlessly through the snow. 8 inches apart, in perfect symmetry, they carved a path through over 100 miles of terrain, like the route of something tireless, precise, and deeply unnatural. But it wasn't just the distance that disturbed the townsfolk, it was where the prints went. They didn't swerve, they didn't stop. The trail advanced in eerily straight lines, defying the natural flow of paths and roads. It climbed over haystacks, crossed the icy surfaces of frozen rivers, and scaled rooftops, leaving crisp indentations in snow-covered tiles. It passed over walls, some too tall for any known animal, and even led to and from the mouths of narrow drainage pipes, some no wider than 4 inches across. Pipes no living creature could enter, and certainly not exit. People began whispering what no one dared speak aloud. These were not the tracks of an animal. Something else had walked through Devon that night. As rumors swelled, so did fear. A figure, dark and horned, was said to have been seen stalking through the mist that lingered over the moors. Tall, with glowing red eyes and legs that ended in cloven hooves. Townspeople, armed with lanterns, muskets, and trembling resolve, set out to track the creature. Some combed the woods, others watched from their windows. But whatever it was, it left no trail they could follow, no scent, no sound, only the prints. And then the trail vanished, as suddenly as it had appeared. For more than a century, the devil's footprints became a legend, a warning passed down over generations. Some called it mass hysteria. Others, those who'd seen it with their own eyes, knew better. They remembered the feeling in the air that morning, not just cold, but wrong, like the world itself had shifted in its sleep. And then came March 12th, 2009. Over 150 years later, they returned. It began just past midnight. A local farmer, up checking on his livestock in the icy wind, spotted something odd along the fence line. The snow was fresh, untouched, clean, and yet there they were, identical prints, cloven-shaped, spaced precisely apart, winding across his property. They led across fields, over hedges, and toward the trees, just like before. The farmer's dog refused to leave the barn. Chickens, usually restless, stood huddled and silent. Even the wind seemed to hush. News spread quickly, and with it came dread. Investigators and skeptics arrived in Devon. Photos were taken, measurements noted, theories offered. But, as always, the evidence refused to fit into any neat explanation. The prints were not just identical to those from 1855, they were exactly the same. Same dimensions, same pattern, same unbroken, impossible path. And, just like before, they led nowhere. They started from nothing. They ended in nothing, as if whatever made them had simply appeared, walked for miles across fences, rooftops, and streams, and then vanished into the air. Since then, people in Devon have grown wary once again. Some dismiss it all as a prank or a strange weather phenomenon, but others know better. They leave no salt near the door, for they say salt keeps things out, and perhaps keeps others in. They avoid going out after dark when the snow is fresh and untouched, because it's not just what you see in the snow that matters. It's what might be watching you from it. And every now and then, on windless winter nights, a farmer or night watchman swears they hear hoofbeats, soft but steady, somewhere out in the white distance, walking across rooftops, headed straight toward town. By September of 1931, the Irving family's quiet existence on their Isle of Man farmhouse had become anything but ordinary. It started with scratching, gentle at first, almost like the twitch of wood settling or the scurry of a mouse behind the walls. But it grew, persistent, rhythmic, intelligent. The sound seemed to follow them, trailing their movements like a shadow just behind the timber. Then came the noises. At night, from within the walls, something mimicked the chittering of a ferret, then shifted to a guttural growl, too deep for anything small. Once, it even let out a noise so disturbingly human, a gurgling whimper like an infant stirring in sleep, that the family sat frozen in silence for minutes, waiting for it to stop. They tried traps, they tried poison, nothing worked. Then the thing spoke. In a strange, sharp voice, muffled by wood and plaster, it introduced itself. I am Jeff. He claimed to be a mongoose, born in New Delhi, India in 1852, but also called himself an earthbound spirit, a ghost in weasel form, and sometimes just a freak. His voice was high-pitched and quick-witted, always a little too human. He didn't just speak, he conversed, sometimes mocking, sometimes affectionate, sometimes cruel. He had moods. The youngest daughter, Vori Irving, was the only one who ever claimed to have seen him fully. She described Jeff as the size of a small rat, covered in yellowish fur, with a large, bushy tail that swayed unnaturally when he moved. But it was his eyes, she said, that stayed with her. Too intelligent, too alive, too old. Jeff had a way of knowing things he shouldn't. He would tell the family about visitors before they arrived. He could recount conversations that had taken place miles away. He spoke of events in far-off cities and quoted scripture, Shakespeare, and old Manx folklore. He also knew intimate details, things only someone inside the house should have known. And he threatened. "I could kill you all," Jeff once told them, "but I won't, because I like you." He would vanish for days, sometimes weeks, then return in the dead of night, whispering through the walls or rattling the windows with tiny clawed hands. And always he left a warning. "If you saw me, you would faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned to stone or salt." For a time, Jeff was treated almost like a member of the family, albeit one kept secret from neighbors and always with a trace of dread. He followed them, spoke to them, teased and tormented them, and they spoke back. They even set out food for him. Reporters came, paranormal investigators, skeptics. Some heard Jeff, others left unconvinced. But the family stood by their story, even when the newspapers mocked them. Then, over the years, Jeff faded. His voice came less often. The scratches grew fainter. Eventually, the house grew quiet again. Vori, who had been Jeff's closest companion, grew up and moved away, but she never entirely escaped him. In 2005, near the end of her life, she gave an interview, her voice brittle with age, but steady. "No," she said simply, "Jeff was not my creation." When asked if he had been real, she paused. "I don't know what Jeff was," she said, eyes distant, "but he was something." Today, the Irving farmhouse still stands, though it is quiet and long abandoned. Locals say the walls are thick, too thick, as if something once burrowed into them and refused to leave. Some who visit say they hear scratching or feel a presence brush past them in the dark. And every so often, when the wind is just right, someone walking the lane below swears they hear a faint, reedy voice barely above the breeze. "I am Jeff. I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet." And for a second, just a second, you might feel like you're being watched by something just behind the wall. It was September 3rd, 1873, when James Warson, a proud and spirited man, took to the open country road between Leamington and Coventry, a winding 20-mile stretch of English countryside that would soon be etched into legend. Warson, in good cheer and high confidence, had accepted a challenge, a boast turned into a wager. He had bragged often about his endurance, his unmatched skill as a runner, and when pressed to prove it, he laughed, nodded, and said, "Watch me." And so they watched him. His two companions, Hammerson Burns and Barham Wise, followed behind in a horse-drawn carriage. Burns, always fascinated by the new wonders of science, had brought along his camera, a heavy device carefully cushioned in the back. It was supposed to be a bit of fun, an afternoon diversion. James Warson jogged ahead of the carriage, running confidently along the center of the road, glancing back from time to time to exchange a few playful remarks. His laughter echoed off the hedgerows, light and full of breath. His stride was strong. He was never more than 20 paces ahead of their view. In fact, he never once left their sight. And then it happened. Somewhere just beyond the stretch of elm trees, Warson turned his head to shout something back at them, a joke they couldn't quite catch. His foot struck something, perhaps a root or a stone, and he pitched forward. What happened next would stay with Wise and Burns for the rest of their lives. There was a scream, short and high and unnatural, a cry of surprise fused with something deeper, a sound that didn't belong to a man falling, but to someone being pulled. Wise, pale and shaking, would later say, "It was the most ghastly sound either of us have ever heard. It wasn't pain. It was like something startled the very soul out of him." But even more terrible than the scream was what followed. Warson vanished. Not in the way someone might fall behind a bush or tumble into a ditch. No. He vanished mid-fall, as if he had been erased from the world before he hit the earth. One moment, he was stumbling forward, arms out, face twisted in panic, and the next, gone. There was no thud, no cry, no body, only open air and the dust slowly settling where he should have landed. The road told the story. Warson's footprints were clear in the soft dirt, crisp and linear, leading down the path. They showed his strong stride, the slowing of pace, a scuff, a stumble, and then nothing. Not a single print further. Burns grabbed his camera and shakily took photographs of the trail. The prints, he said, ended as though the man had stepped off the world itself. A search was called, and quickly. Locals gathered, farmers, constables, children with wide, nervous eyes. They fanned out through the brush, combed the hedges, tapped trees, and overturned stones. They searched the underbrush for any sign, a scrap of cloth, a broken branch, a cry from somewhere beyond. Nothing. They brought in bloodhounds, but when the dogs reached the place where Warson had disappeared, they stopped cold, tails down, whining, refusing to cross the invisible line where the tracks ended. One even tried to bolt back toward town, as if something in the air terrified them. No body was found, no clothing, no trace of James Warson. He was never seen or heard from again. The road between Leamington and Coventry has changed in the years since, but the locals still remember. A few of the old-timers won't walk that stretch at dusk, let alone at night. They say strange things happen near the spot. Cold gusts of air when there's no wind, faint screams heard far off in the trees. Some say you can still see footprints in the dirt after a soft rain. A runner's trail that ends mid-step. They never lead anywhere, and no one knows where they begin. August 7th, 1973 began like any other sweltering summer day in the American Southwest. But by nightfall, the airwaves would carry a voice, a desperate, trembling voice that would echo across the desert and lodge itself in the minds of everyone who heard it. It came first through Channel 14 on a CB radio near Albuquerque. A woman and her husband, long-haul drivers on a return route, heard the faint static unravel into something human. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, help me. I'm stuck. My dad's not moving. I think he's dead." The voice was young, barely older than 10. He called himself Larry. He described a red and white pickup truck flipped into a ravine somewhere in New Mexico. He said his father had a heart attack and slumped forward on the wheel while they were rabbit hunting. The truck swerved, tipped, and landed upside down. Both doors were jammed shut. He was trapped, bleeding, alone, and scared. Over the next 6 days, Larry's voice came and went across the CB frequencies, cutting through static in sudden bursts, full of fear and pain. Truckers, hobbyists, and even a few military bands caught fragments. "It's getting dark again. I'm really cold. I don't hear the birds anymore." Sometimes his signal seemed too strong to come from where he said he was. Sometimes too weak, even for nearby scanners. But people across California, Wyoming, Arizona, even as far as Vancouver, Canada, reported hearing him. The details were always the same. "Red and white pickup. My dad's dead. I'm Larry. Please." A search and rescue operation was launched. Helicopters swept the Manzano Mountains, where triangulation placed his original signal. Dozens of volunteers scoured dry creek beds and dusty ravines, calling out the boy's name. And then, something strange happened. One helicopter pilot reported contact, but the boy called himself David, not Larry. Still trapped, still in a truck, still bleeding, still alone. The pilot circled the area for hours, but never spotted the wreckage. Then came another complication. On August 11th, a family from Missouri was reported missing, and they had a young boy named Larry. Panic surged through the operation, but it broke just as quickly. The family was found the very next day, completely unharmed. So who was the Larry on the radio? An Army sergeant experienced in radial operations claimed to have spoken to the boy for over 3 hours one night. He said Larry's voice would fade, then surge like something interfering with the frequency. Despite his patient questioning, Larry refused, or was unable, to give basic information. No last name, no phone number, no town. Only, "Please hurry, I think it's getting in." The sergeant asked what he meant. "The dark," Larry whispered. "It's not just night out there." August 13th, the signal stopped. A chilling silence replaced the voice. The batteries, they said, must have died, but others weren't so sure. Investigators found no wreckage, no broken tree limbs, no tire tracks, no signs of impact. And yet the reports poured in for weeks. A transmission in the dead of night from a trucker outside Flagstaff. A teenager in Wyoming who swore Larry had spoken directly to him. "I can see stars again. I think they're moving." Some reports were hoaxes, obvious ones, static-ridden prank calls by copycats seeking thrills. But a few, a very few, held something else, something harder to explain. Voices that didn't match Larry's, yet told the same story. Different names, same truck, same helplessness, same strange mention of something outside watching. Eventually, the official story settled. It was all a hoax. Maybe a clever kid with a ham radio and a flair for performance. Maybe a misidentified case of overlapping radio signals. Maybe, just maybe, nothing at all. But those who heard Larry speak, they remember. They remember the trembling in his voice, the tears, the weak breaths, the silence between sobs, the cracking desperation of a child who truly believed he was going to die. And when CB radio users today scroll through frequencies late at night, a few still pause at static that seems a little too rhythmic, a whisper just beneath the buzz. Sometimes, in the right places, they say, "You can hear it. Please, help me. I'm still here." And across the desert wind, the dark still waits in the canyons. November 29th, 1970, should have been an ordinary, brisk winter afternoon in the Isdalen Valley, a place the locals called Death Valley for the strange number of fatal accidents it had seen. But that afternoon, as a man and his 2 young daughters walked along the remote hiking trail, something caught the father's eye. A strange smell, sharp and chemical, carried lightly by the wind. And then they saw her. A body, partially burned. The smell of scorched flesh and gasoline hung in the frozen air. She lay on her back in a patch of clearing, limbs awkwardly bent, as if she had collapsed mid-step or had been positioned. Around her, scattered neatly in a radius, were sleeping pills, over 50 of them, and several empty bottles. She had no identification. Her clothing tags were all cut out, every single one. Her fingerprints had been sanded off, her skin filed smooth at the fingertips. She was unrecognizable, almost erasing herself from the world. And yet, something lingered. Her teeth, still intact, bore traces of dental work, the kind only practiced in Latin America. A clue strange and disconnected from the frozen Nordic landscape where she was found. The Norwegian police called in forensic experts. She became known only as the Isdal woman. From a lead buried deep in routine train station logs, the police found 2 suitcases she had left behind in a locker at Bergen Station. The contents were as strange as they were unsettling. A tube of prescription lotion, its label peeled off. Several wigs folded and packed meticulously. A notebook filled with what first appeared to be gibberish, but eventually revealed to be coded movements, dates and places, listing towns, hotel names, and train schedules. A cache of 500 German marks hidden beneath the lining. Broken glass, some pieces showing partial fingerprints, others wiped clean. The more they uncovered, the less sense it made. She had stayed in multiple hotels in Bergen, using 9 different identities across Europe. Hotel staff remembered her clearly. She stood out, always elegant, distant, yet oddly watchful. She spoke German, French, English, and Dutch fluently. Her accent? Indistinct, not quite belonging to any country. Some said she might have been Belgian, Others thought she sounded Scandinavian, trying not to sound Scandinavian. One hotel worker remembered something else. She always changed rooms, he said. Never stayed in the same one 2 nights in a row. Always asked for a balcony, even in the cold. And she only ever ordered porridge with milk, nothing else. Then came the account that changed everything. 32 years later, a man stepped forward. He had kept his silence out of fear, not just fear of ridicule, but something deeper. He told the police that 5 days before the body was discovered, he had been hiking through the same remote area. That's when he saw her, a woman, alone, walking along the frozen ridge. She was elegant, wearing a dress coat and shoes unfit for the terrain. And her face was contorted in panic. She tried to speak to him, not out loud. She mouthed something, soundless but urgent. "Help me." Behind her, no more than 10 paces back, were 2 tall men, dressed in dark coats, walking in perfect sync. No urgency, no emotion. The man told police that when he reported the incident back in 1970, the officer on the other end of the phone listened quietly, then simply said, "Forget her. She was dispatched." No follow-up, no report, just silence. In the years that followed, the official file stayed open, technically, but no progress was ever made. Her identities remained false, her real name never discovered, her killers, if that's what they were, never pursued. Theories swirled: Cold War spy, intelligence courier, rogue agent. But the truth remained buried beneath decades of silence, whispers, and official shrugs. And today, hikers in the Isdalen Valley still pause at that clearing, where the trees seem too still, where the wind moves a little differently. Some say they've seen a flicker of light between the trees at dusk, like a reflection off glass. Others say they feel watched, closely, like someone just beyond sight is standing very still, waiting. Some even claim that if you walk the trail alone and stop near where her body was found, you can hear faint footsteps behind you, never gaining, never fading, as if someone's retracing old steps that never quite disappeared. And in the archives of the Bergen police station, one old officer keeps a folder with her photograph, her face blank, haunting, slightly scorched, and the words, "No country, no name, no voice, found, not lost, dispatched."